Hi everyone, it's Jenny and I'm excited to be joining you today as part of Spellbinders' latest monthly release. So if you're not aware, there is a new release today. Every month on the 10th, Spellbinders releases new goodies. And I'm going to be showing you today these 3 cards that I created using the Christmas project kit. So as part of the celebration of the monthly release, Spellbinders puts together a kit which includes some of the goodies from the latest release, along with cards, instructions, supplies, everything you need to create a number of projects. And I'm going to give you some inspiration today using those products. My first card features the Kaleidoscope Christmas tree. It's a set of 4 dies. 3 of them layer on top of each other to create the Christmas tree itself. And then there's also a cute star tree topper that you can add or not, your choice, to embellish the top of the Christmas tree. All of my cards today feature 3 colours, 2 of which are the same on every card. I'm using Oatmeal Cookie and Brush Gold cardstock for all 3 of my cards, and then adding 1 other additional cardstock colour. So for this one, I'm also adding in some black licorice. To create my card, I'm first going to die cut each of my layers. So I'm using black licorice cardstock for the first layer, Oatmeal Cookie and Brush Gold. These are really intricate dies, so once you've run each of them through your Platinum 6, you'll see that you might have pieces that remain stuck inside the die cut. So you can just grab your tool-in-one and use the pokey end just to pop out any last few pieces, or the roller end to roll out those smaller pieces, and it works really, really well, and you can see how pretty these die cuts are once you've cut them out. My base layer is the black licorice, and then my middle layer is the Oatmeal Cookie, and my top layer is the Brush Gold. You can see here as I line up these 2 layers together, how they fit together. So what you'll see is the outer edge all perfectly line up. That makes it really easy to adhere these together. And then the loops and the holes in the centers are actually slightly different sizes so that it allows the base layer to peep through. So for that reason, I kept my darkest layer as the main base layer, the black. And the Brush Gold is the top because it's so pretty and shiny and shimmery. I wanted that as the top layer of my tree. But you can choose whichever order and whichever colours you want. You'll get different looks to this tree depending on which colours you put where. I did also die cut that little star tree topper from some gold glitter cardstock that I had a scrap of, just to add a little bit of bling to my card that's otherwise pretty neutral. And then I'm just going to use some liquid adhesive with a fine tip and just layer them on top of each other. They're very, very straightforward to put together because that outer edge all lines up perfectly. And if you need to, you can just put an acrylic block on top, make sure they adhere together and keep flat. And here's a close-up look. It really is such a pretty effect. I love these Kaleidoscope dies. Now for my base layer, I've got a panel of cream cardstock here, and then I'm going to die cut it. It's trimmed to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm using this Essential Rectangles die. This is not in the project kit. And this will actually punch a border of holes all around the edge of my panel of cardstock. This is whipped cream cardstock. And just to make sure that that rectangle die is lined up perfectly on my panel, I've used a piece of washi tape. I removed most of the stickiness just so that I didn't get any of the cardstock ripping. And then when there's some of those dots left inside, I'm going to use my tool-in-one again. I got a lot of action making these cards, my tool-in-one did. Now I'm just laying out how I want my card to look. I haven't adhered anything at this point, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment directly onto that card panel itself. So that's for that reason I haven't adhered anything. I'm choosing my sentiment, and then I'm going to pop my card panel into my stamp positioning tool and line up my sentiment stamp. So this stamp is also from the project kit, and it's from the To You and Yours sentiment stamp set, And I'm going to remove those die cuts. Now I know exactly where I want my stamp to go. And then ink it up in black licorice ink. This is Fun Stamper's Journey ink. And I'm just going to stamp that a couple of times just to make sure I get a clear impression. Hence why I'm using my stamp positioning tool. I didn't want to mess up my die cut panel by stamping it in the wrong place. This one says Season's Greetings. I use a couple of different sentiments from this stamp set for all of my cards today. And I could just adhere my Kaleidoscope tree at this point, add it to a card base and call it done. But I did want to add a little bit more of that brushed gold because it's so pretty. So I've got all these die cut circles all the way around the border of my card base, card panel. So I'm going to add some dry adhesive into the center of my card. Make sure that you don't overlap those dots, and then I'm going to add some of that brush gold, just a panel cut slightly smaller than my white panel, and add it to the back, and then that lets that color peep through those dots and it adds a really nice effect. I'm going to pop up my Kaleidoscope tree on foam adhesive as well as my star tree topper. And then just as a little finishing touch, I'm adding some adhesive pearls just in a few places on the tree to adorn it before I add it to a white note card. And that finishes my first card. Here's a close-up look. It's very neutral and classy, but you can completely change it up with a variety of different colours and different gemstones or embellishments for the tree to get a completely different look. My next card features the Christmas Ornament border die set. So this is a close-up look at it. It's got the ornaments themselves. They will actually die cut out just the patterns in the centres, and then you get these borders that you can use to die cut just one edge, both edges, or even no edges. I'll show you how I use a couple of different varieties with these dies in a minute to create my card. It also comes with two little bells that you can die cut out and hang off those ornaments. I'm not going to be using those today. So I've got a panel cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 of Fun Stamper's Journey Cranberry Bliss cardstock, and I've laid down the main die over the bottom edge of the card, probably about a 1/2 inch from the side, and die cut it out, run it through my machine, use my tool-in-one to poke out those pieces that may have been stuck inside. I'm then going to take the border that lines up against that right-hand edge, butt it up so that I've got a tiny border around the ornaments, and then run it through my machine. And you'll see that it leaves this gorgeous, like, detailed edge. It's super intricate, and this is just perfect for creating borders, as the name would suggest, of the die set. I've now got another panel of the exact same cardstock, cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so the exact same size as my first panel. And I'm using my first panel, overlaying it on top so I can line up the border die and run it back through my machine. This is just on the second panel. I only used the first panel to get the right alignment. And you'll see now, when I overlay that first panel, I've got something that perfectly matches the size and shape of my first panel, but just without those windows die cut into it. So I've set that to one side, and I'm using the ornament border one more time on some brushed gold cardstock. I've run it through, and I've been very careful to make sure that I just remove my plates from my Platinum 6, including the cardstock and the die just sandwiched between it. I don't want to lose any of these pieces. Some of them are tiny, and so for that reason, I've taken all of my plates and the cardstock and the die very carefully onto my work surface. Just while you were watching, I adhered my two cardstock panels together, the Cranberry Bliss cardstock panels, and I completely coated that second panel in dry adhesive. I'm going to be doing some inlaid die cutting. If you're not familiar with this, this is where you add in the pieces from a separate die cut onto the top, and they will adhere to that dry adhesive. Any pieces that I missed, I added some liquid glue in. Now you could use your jewel picker or a tool to just pick up each piece individually and lay them into those open areas on the red panel. However, that would take a long time. I started doing that and thought, this is madness. So instead, you can see I've got a couple of tricks here. First one is taking the actual cardstock that still has some of the pieces stuck in it, lining it up perfectly with my red piece, so you can see exactly where those holes are and where they would line up with the red piece, and then using some tweezers, I could use my tool-in-one just to pop out those pieces, and they'll fall into their holes in the red piece below. And you can just do a tiny bit of shuffling. And secondly, you can also do the same thing with the die itself, where there's any pieces still stuck in the die. You can use the same tactic, and what you'll end up with is perfectly inlaid image of the brush gold in the red, or whatever colours you choose to use. It's a much better time-saving approach to doing inlaid die cutting, particularly for intricate dies like this. Now I've got a panel of oatmeal cookie, which I'm going to be popping my red panel onto. I've checked the size and I've stamped my sentiment from the To You and Yours sentiment set, also from the kit, in black licorice ink. And then I'm going to mount my red panel with foam adhesive onto that oatmeal cookie piece, and then mount it onto a white card base with just a couple of strips of the white peeping out on either side. Add a couple of adhesive pearls, and that finishes my second card. I just love the look of inlaid die cutting, and this was a perfect die to do that with. So for my third and final card, I'm using the Kaleidoscope Plaid dies. This is a set of 3 dies. They work very similarly to the Kaleidoscope tree dies that I showed you at the start of this video for my first card. You can die cut them and overlay the layers using different colours, and you get different effects. So once again, I'm using Oatmeal Cookie. I'm using the brush gold because apparently that's all I can use now. It's such a nice colour cardstock. And then I'm going to be using the Watermelon Fusion, which is this super awesome hot pink colour of cardstock for my base layer. That's the wider cross. And I've die cut each of these dies 3 times. 3 times from the Watermelon Fusion, 3 times from the brush gold, and 3 times from the Oatmeal Cookie. And I'm just going to give you a quick look at how these overlay with each other. You can switch it up. I switched around the second and third layer for my center panel. So I'm just going to use my liquid adhesive again, add very thin lines of glue on the back, and then overlay them. And again, they line up perfectly around that outer edge, and they change depending on how you overlay them. And I just love this effect that you get. I've seen, I think, one of the example cards where this was cut 4 times and you can lay them to create bigger plaid panels. That's not what I'm going to do here, but so many ideas for these Kaleidoscope dies. I think they're one of my most favourite designs that Spellbinders has come up with. I'm going to create a slimline card. So my panel here of whipped cream cardstock is cut to 3.5 inches across and 8.5 inches down. And I'm going to add some foam adhesive to the back, hiding it behind those wide pink crosses, and then pop them onto this panel. I am using a T-ruler just to make sure that I get them lined up perfectly straight and evenly spaced. I find it helps to do the top and the bottom panels first and then add that center one in so that the 2 spaces will be exactly the same. And then I'm going to mount this onto a panel of the Watermelon Fusion cardstock, leaving a very tiny border all the way around the outside edge. I did trim the panel again, the white panel, just slightly smaller than 3.5 by 8.5. So my pink panel is exactly 3.5 by 8.5. And then I'm going to adhere that to a card base, which is cut to 7 inches by 8.5 inches, scored at 3.5 inches. For my sentiment, I'm using the To You and Yours again, and this time I'm using that large Christmas sentiment. And then I'm going to craft my own sentiment using that Merry Christmas. I'm going to trim off the Merry. I'm going to emboss it this time. I'm using some black licorice cardstock. I've treated it with a powder tool. And then I'm going to heat emboss it with bright white embossing powder. And I'll heat it up with my heat tool. And then I decided that because my life isn't hard enough, I'm going to fussy cut out the word Christmas. So I went around the edge with some very sharp scissors, and then also within the C, and I was actually quite pleased with how this turned out. My fussy cutting is not known to be the best. I'm going to add it with some foam adhesive in the centre at an angle, and then I've trimmed off the Christmas from the Merry Christmas and popped the Merry just above the Christmas there. I do hope this has provided you with some inspiration on how you can use some of the new release from Spellbinders this month. Be sure to head on over to Spellbinders blog. There's much more inspiration to be found there, and have a wonderful day. Bye.